Hey, Deserving listeners, 90 Day Fiancé. Let's watch.
Oh. All right, I'm going to get in my pajamas.
I am super nervous to talk to Ed. Not that I don't think we're very strong in our relationship right now, but every time he's always hung out with Rich, he always broke up with me. I don't think that Ed ever really thought for himself in the past. So it scares me. It makes me panic.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Liz's demeanor, and the way she comes across is that she's frequently very worried about him leaving her, about him abandoning her, breaking up with her. And in this moment, she is also worried. Ed, went to talk with his friend, and Liz would at least somewhat rationally think, oh, well, what if the friend the friend is against this relationship, against me. What if he convinces Ed to leave me? I wonder how Ed's going to be when he gets back. So, she's really focusing on that. But I think that's a theme of hers, which is notable.
I don't know if I want to know how it went.
There were fireworks. I've never seen him that unhinged. He doesn't want us together. But I called him out on his relationship with my mom.
Okay, he used the word unhinged. That's certainly not a word I would use from the edit that we got. I mean, Ed, maybe he means something different by unhinged, but I would think unhinged, it implies rage, it implies being out of control, and the friend didn't exhibit that. And I wouldn't normally be noting that word, but Ed will do that sometimes, that when someone's against him, he sees them as unhinged or something along those lines. Like when Rose would speak out against him, he would just look judgmentally at her. And I guess even with Ed and Liz, the phone call, that Ed would see her as unhinged, as out of control. So it just makes you wonder, like, what Ed's early childhood was like. Did he experience someone that was, quote unquote, unhinged in reality, and he distorts that, transfers it to other people?
How that's not helping us. He's sad that he lost a friend. But I called him out.
Okay, but do you want him in your life?
You're my priority.
For me right now, I'm not okay with it.
So I think Ed correctly read the question for what it was. For Liz, I don't think she's primarily concerned with Ed being friends with his friend. She's primarily concerned about, are you going to leave me? And is this an ongoing threat? Should I be worried? So she asks, do you want to be friends with him? And I think Ed would say, well, yeah. If he answered the question verbatim, he would say, well, I'm not sure, but yeah, I mean, I haven't given up completely yet. But he sees, well, I think this is a question as to where my priorities are, and so he reassures her and says, you're my priority.
Him. I'm not ready for Rich to come back into Ed's life. Anytime Ed and I would try to talk about something, it was always, well, Rich said this, or Rich thinks this. Got to the point where I'm like, am I dating you or am I dating Rich? So
interesting. So we're really seeing a strong triangulation between Rich and Liz and Ed. Rich hates Liz. Liz feels threatened by Rich. Ed is in between. And it seems, so Ed is the glue in that Rich and Liz wouldn't know each other otherwise, I think. So Ed is seemingly engaging in some pretty strong triangulation, and the others are falling into it, or, yeah, so how do I... So in systems thinking, one of the mechanisms that we want to look at as an angle to understand systems is triangulation. So Murray Bowen hypothesized or proposed that all the most stable configuration in a system is the triangle. I think he was trying to relate it to architecture to some extent, which doesn't make a ton of sense, but because actually his whole theory was trying to explain all of nature, not just human relationships, but all of nature. And there is some analogies that you could say. Anyway, point is that it is a useful tool to look at triangulation. And the idea is that when there is tension between two people or just two things, it tends to triangulate a third to stabilize things. And sometimes that's functional, and this is an idea that I don't know if I invented. I probably didn't, but I don't see reference to this language, but I will propose that there can be functional triangles. I mean, to some extent, it's not in line with the original definition, but this is my model, is that I look for dysfunctional and functional, and I guess neutral triangles. A dysfunctional triangle is defined in that the original tension between the two people does not resolve in any kind of way. Whereas a functional triangulation is when it is resolved. So when a couple comes to my office, they're triangulating me. And I am that third that is invited into the tension to stabilize. And if I help the two of them resolve their conflict, then it's a functional triangulation. Whereas if the couple goes to their, so for Ed, he has tension with Liz, and he triangulated his friend Rich. And for Rich, for whatever reason, and maybe it's rational, who knows, but it seems as though Rich got pulled in and was convinced that Liz was an evil person and that Ed is good and all good, essentially. And then now the conflict between Ed and Liz has been transferred to Rich and Liz, and now Ed is being triangulated into their conflict. And so if no one is differentiated, meaning no one really stops and thinks, what's really happening right here? Are my emotions rational? Is my behavior really helping the situation? Is my attitude accurate? If you never differentiate from the situation and look at yourself, look at the situation, you'll just be inundated by what's happening and fall prey to the way it feels, the way it seems to you. So to Rich, it's like, well, the way Ed's talking about Liz to me, it seems like Liz is evil. Liz is a horrible human being. But, especially if you're watching the show, which presumably Rich does, right? I mean, maybe he doesn't, but you would think as Rich, you'd be like, oh, well, what Ed was saying was not. Now, who knows what's really happening, because the show just shows us what they want to show us and what they manage to capture and what the cast members deem to reveal. But it doesn't seem likely that Liz is this horrific human being that is abusive and horrible in the way that essentially, I mean, I'm exaggerating to some extent, but Rich seemed to be saying that. So then Rich falls in line with the triangulation and then starts to have a conflict with Liz, but has no way of resolving that. So if Rich was to be more functional, he would do something like what we saw other people on the show, like Tatiana with Eve was this way, where Rich might say something like, wow, you're saying a lot of bad things about Liz, and I care about you, Ed, so it makes me wonder if this is a good partnership, but I don't really know the situation, and I'm just really sad for what's happening. It makes sense that you would feel that way. You just stick to that. But when you start to conclude, oh, Liz is evil, and this narrative that I've been given is all truthful, and the way that it feels to me is accurate, that's when you fall into this. So then, because the tension now gets transferred between Rich and Liz, the system now allows Ed to relax a little bit, because he's no longer thinking about the tension between him and Liz. He's now being triangulated into the tension between Liz and Rich that he created essentially through the triangulation, but the others fell prey to given their lack of differentiation. And then now Ed is invited into their conflict. How does he deal with it? Is he functional or dysfunctional? So a functional way to be triangulated into their conflict would to talk with Rich, which did not happen, and say, you know what, I have to apologize because I've been feeding you a lot of negativity about Liz, and that's my fault. It makes sense that you'd be against Liz because of the way I was talking about her. So let me try to tell you some other things about Liz that are good. Or, you know what, Rich, I totally get that you're against her, but I think maybe it's best that you and I just hang out and talk about other things, because I kind of poisoned the well with everything I was feeding you with. That would be more functional, because to Rich, at least it would give him an opportunity to be like, oh, maybe I'm distorted. It would allow Liz, then you go to Liz and you say, The reason why Rich is against you is not because of you or him, it's because of me. It's all my fault, and I'm working on it. So, don't worry about the future, and don't think that Rich is a bad person or out to get you. He's just protective of me because I fed him a one-sided story and probably was massively exaggerated. That would be more functional triangulation because it would actually help to resolve the conflict. But what is seemingly happening is that the triangulation is continuing and getting worse, and other people might get triangulated in, maybe the daughter, the mom, all these, there's all these triangles that are happening. And so when you really zoom out and look at all the triangles, the daughter and Ed probably were having a conflict, and Ed's mom was triangulated into that. And then they ostracized Ed in the process. So there's all these triangles if you just graphically look at the whole thing, and no one is stopping and thinking, okay, what's best for us here? What distortions am I having right now? How am I allowing my emotional guidance system to trick me into believing things that aren't necessarily accurate, or at least are unconfirmed at this point? And everyone's triangulating and undifferentiated and attacking and banding together. And so for Ed, he might actually subconsciously, or the system subconsciously kind of wants there to be a triangulated enemy like mom, daughter, Rich, so that Ed and Liz feel like they're closer together. When we lack connection and when we're terrified of something not working out with someone, we will tend to be attracted to triangulating another person. I'll often give the mundane example of two people meet and there's tension because they don't know each other, so they triangulate the weather. The weather's so bad, or politics, or a sports team or something. And through this process, the two people feel bonded because they're agreeing on something, and they both, by contrast, are saying, well, our relationship is better than both of our relationship with the Mariners, and by definition, we're closer, right? Think of World War II, when the United States and Soviet Union were allies against Hitler and the Third Reich, whereas as soon as the war was over and Germany lost the war, then it was back to being enemies again. So, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? Now, what's happening is that everyone's they're actually consciously trying to reduce the conflict and resolve the conflict. They're trying to establish as many close relationships as they can. They're trying to be healthy, but because they're not thinking, because they lack differentiation, they're not evaluating the situation, and they, to some extent, can't, because their thoughts and their emotions are all jumbled up, that they just proceed forward and everything falls apart.
So I'm very uneasy with Rich's motives to still kind of try to tear us apart.
I only want your acceptance, your daughter's acceptance, and Leon's.
And she is now paranoid about him in a way that probably isn't justified. Who knows? And it just makes me wonder if Ed has a long history, maybe throughout his entire life since he was a child, in which all relationships lack differentiation, not only interpersonally, but interpersonally, but also that always triangulation is present in an intense way. There's always an enemy. That's something you'll see with some people and the style of their triangulation and their relationships. Sometimes they're attracted to others that are like this, where there's always an outside force that is trying to bring you down, bring down a relationship, and it just becomes very comfortable to people in that way. And so it just, because the way that he was with Rose and his daughter, and it just seems like Ed is comfortable. Now, for Liz, it might be similar. She might also be engineering this. And who knows, because they only show us what they show us. Who knows who Liz is triangulating with,
It's been hard to, lose Rich as a friend. I mean, to be honest, I'm luckier to have Liz, but yeah, I do miss Richard. We did a lot of things together. He was kind of my right arm.
I mean, just think about all the times that Ed has had this said this thing, me and my daughter, we used to be so close, and, but I'd rather be with Rose. And I guess if this is the way it's going to be, it's just a constant thing. Now, I want to be clear that triangulation itself is not wrong. It's not bad. It's not unhealthy. When you are suffering and say you and your spouse are fighting, it isn't inherently unhealthy to talk with a friend about, or a therapist about, what's happening with your partner. You feel tension here, and you have this tendency to triangulate, right? To go to your friend and talk about what's happening. That can be functional, it can be dysfunctional. It just depends on how everyone deals with it, right?
I know this is hard on you. I mean, I'm not going to close the door, but I'm choosing my soulmate. I choose you.
And then that face that he makes, I'm guessing it's real. And it just makes me wonder if he needs this subconsciously to exist in order to demonstrate that he loves someone. Or because also think about all the triangulation that they would do with other people, like the phone call, they had triangulated this coworker of hers. That was a triangle as well. So instead of him going to her and saying, hey, I feel insecure about a relationship, he had to involve her friend whom she drove home after work and triangulated that and used that as, you're trying to cheat on me, when probably it's deep down ongoing for him that he worries that she's going to leave him. I'm pretty sure. I'd give that a 99% likelihood that deep down, even though he doesn't really exhibit it in an overt way, that deep down he is deeply insecure about people loving him. I really do think that that's true. And I think a lot of his behavior, I think it comes across as insincere and kind of smarmy in a way. And I think that is his way of trying to cover that up, is my guess. So I don't know. That's kind of a stretch there. Anyway, the phone call really alerted to me just how deeply insecure that he was. Because I'll remind people that she asked, because a friend of hers said, hey, can you drive me home? There's some sort of hardship or something. And it was a fair ways away, like an hour or something. And she's like, well, okay, let me call Ed or text him. And Ed said, yeah, sure, whatever. And then she did. She drove the fella home. And then when she was coming back, then Ed started to verbally abuse her. And I don't use that term lightly. He was berating her, putting her down, treating her badly, rejecting her. And she's pleading and crying and, no, don't do this, don't do this. And he's like, you're a piece of crap. I mean, I don't know if he used that phrase, but it was that kind of language. And you're like, wow, intense, abusive, not okay. And what that says is that he, even though at first he's like, yeah, sure. And who knows what his state was at that moment, but he was agreeing to it. And then, so rationally he should say, well, I am angry at you, but I did agree to it. You know, you'd think you'd have some awareness, but when you have that much pain and insecurity and attachment triggering, it eclipses all rational thought, all differentiation, if you will. And so his go-to behavior is to attack and be abusive. That points to a foundation of people are going to leave me. They are going to hurt me. They are going to reject me in an unfair way. And I have to have this angry person at the ready to alert people to stop them from doing that. Now, from the outside, it was completely irrational, but, you know, we're not rational creatures. All right, well, that does it for that episode in which I react to 90 Day Fiancé Happily Ever After. Everyone, please take care of yourself and take care of others, because we all deserve it. We really, really do.